I want to go to my next guest. We are joined with the one and only a good friend of this show, Arnaud Develay. He is an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law and participated in the defense of former President Saddam Hussein, along with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction regime imposed on Syria while living in Damascus. He is author of the book Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of the U.S., or I should say the American political consensus. Arnaud, welcome to the show, man. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm fine, Jamal. Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year to yourself, your family, and all the listeners.
Oh, man, thank you. I appreciate it. Happy New Year's back at you. I had to bring you on. Recently, Joe Biden, on his way out, passed what I call the nuclear option of sanctions. And this was some sanctions that he didn't necessarily, I can't get it out. These were sanctions that he didn't pass over the course of his administration. If you remember, many of the sanctions that Joe Biden was talking about that were going after energy was understood was going to hit Europe. But for the most part, the U.S. was going to be safely away from them. Now, I played a clip earlier today with Jen Psaki, and I'll play that clip once again just for the public, just so you know I'm not making this up, where when asked about it directly, Psaki points out, hey, we have to pay for our values. That, yes, we're passing these sanctions, and yes, it's going to have an impact on America, but hey, as the president said, we have to pay for our values. Now, this was back then for the sanctions that they passed that were minor in regards to how they were going to hit Americans, even though it did increase inflation. I'm just playing this because I want to give context to what Joe Biden is doing now.
Thanks, Jen. Following up on Leach's question, a lot of focus on the economic pain Russia potentially from these sanctions. But what about the economic pain here? The Russians are saying they think gas prices in Europe are going to double. How high could they get here?
Well, I think, again, Peter, and as I said to Leisha, some of this depends on what President Putin does. So as he is suggesting what the impact will be around the world, it's all based on what his actions are, just to be very clear about it. What the president is focused on and is working on is taking every step we can to communicate with, coordinate with, engage with big global suppliers around the world to minimize the impact on the energy markets.
But even without all this going on, gas in California is almost $5 a gallon. Should people across the country expect to see that kind of a number when they go to gas up their car? $5, $6?
Well, again, I think as you heard the president say last week, standing up for our values is not without cost.
Right there, standing up for our values is not without cost. Got to pay for our values. Got to pay for our values. All right. So now, on his way out, Joe Biden passed sanctions that he knows is going to directly impact that cost. And he's doing so on his way out because he wants the cost to be stuck with Trump. So when Americans are going to pay for more in groceries, when Americans are paying more at the fuel pump, that they think Trump, despite the fact that these are sanctions that Joe Biden is passing themselves. Give the audience an explanation of these sanctions. He's going not just after certain companies, he's also going after ships, like 180 different ships or something like that the Russians are supposed to use to get gas from point A to point B. What's going on, Arnaud?
Yes, well, as far as the ships are concerned, I think it's referred as the ghost fleet, something
The shadow.
like this.
Yeah.
The shadow fleet. Yeah.
Shadow fleet.
So I mean, it's more of the same with that gang, and honestly, I'm not a pro-Trump, but with like 7 days, 8 days to go now, we can't wait, to see them out because it's just, it's par for the course with this kind of off-world ideological slant on everything that this administration's been doing.
Yeah.
And to the extent they've made mistakes upon mistakes, predicated upon, I would say, erroneous perception of reality. We used to say something about back in the days, the people who think of themselves as somehow imbued with a manifest destiny, as opposed to those people, politicians, as it were, statesmen for some of them, who, as we say, they're known because they are counting. They do the math.
Mhm.
So sooner or later, those people who conduct policy predicated on this notion of exceptionalism tend to put themselves at the center of the perfect storm because they manage to rally everybody and their mother against them, essentially, in this kind of double down
Yeah.
approach to everything under the sun. Whereas the other more grounded politicians and or statesmen, as it were, tend to evaluate the cost. It's a risk cost analysis, and you have to look at the numbers. If you're in a war, you have to look how many troops you got, how many divisions, like Stalin used to say about the Vatican. How many divisions,
Mhm.
And so this is what we're seeing with this administration. One more time, this kind of lashing as at the incoming administration, trying to. I wouldn't even say that it's predicated on trying to hand over the situation so as to politically use it and blame him. I think in America, at the very least, no one is deluded about this. It's all squarely falling on the Biden administration from top to bottom. And the thing is, those people actually have their counterpart in Europe, believe it or not. People like former French finance minister Bruno Le Maire, for instance, at the onset of the special military operation, went out and said they were going to bring the Russian economy on its knees and doubled down about this. And when he was confronted times and time over about the fact that not only the Russian economy was absorbing the blow, but was actually doing pretty well and benefiting from that train of sanctions, he was trying to dismiss it as some kind of pro-Russian pep talk. So with those people, and it's the same thing with former EU Commissioner Thierry Breton. Those people are they've created for themselves this kind of condominium with semantics to boot. They only hang around with themselves. They are completely ideologically forged in their worldview. And to the extent their policy never quite gets them what they want, they either blame other people's perception, or they outright peg you as Putin and or Russian agent, as it were. I mean, I don't know.
Well, they do. If you
So
think of Georgia, for example, as I was talking about Net, speaking about it with Net, they would say that a person who doesn't want to go to war is Putin's, like they would say, he's Russian backed or Russia leaning, as opposed to the person's just pro-Georgian, or the person is a Georgian nationalist or Romanian
that's it.
nationalist. It's so bizarre, the language that they've used, that they've agreed upon in order to attack their political opposition.
Yeah, it's a very binary view of the world.
Yeah.
It's either or, which
Mhm.
actually reminds us, what George W. Bush used to say, at the onset of the war on terror. You're
Yes,
either
sir.
with us or with the terrorist.
Yep.
But look at the situation now. I mean, we've known it obviously since 2012 and the Jack Sullivan memo to Hillary Clinton, and herself saying even that in Syria, for instance, we are on the side of Al Qaeda, or Al Qaeda is on our side. But essentially, those people, they don't allow reality to ruin their party. They have that script and they go with it. And whether you're talking about some of those operating political operatives in DC, or some of their satraps in Romania, for instance, or Georgia, they all have adopted the same talking points. It's quite fascinating to observe.
It is bizarre. It is very
Yeah,
bizarre.
and
I've
and
never
then they
seen
all
anything.
congregate at the Atlantic Council, at the this NATO junket, once a year in Munich, the
Mhm.
conference on security in Munich, and they're all exchanging slaps on the back, and everything is copacetic, and
But
but
they have to
obviously,
see that that's not working. They have to see that that's falling apart. For example, just if you look at France, or Germany, for example, and the political machinations that they had to go through, that Macron had to go through, for example, in order to keep either the left-wing government or Le Pen's party from out of power. I mean, he is effectively politically neutered in France. If you look at Germany with the AfD, well, given a fair shot, the AfD may actually win that race, even though they may have to go through some kind of political machinations in order to keep them out of power. And again, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia is a new one that has just won, where the right wing wins in that election. It seems that they're losing their grip. Or am I misunderstanding what I'm watching?
No, they are losing their grips, but they've got so many steps ahead of us that they've put into places. I mean, they control the media, they control the justice system, and all the way to the constitutional court level.
Yeah.
They control the narrative, and to the extent every EU member state has surrendered its sovereignty to the EU Commission, they have no way to, I would say, influence policy.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you want to be in the system, if you want to be, getting the advantages that come with it and the perks, and let's make no mistake about it, a lot of politicians are in it mainly for the perks. You've gotta be briefed as to what you can promote and what you should not promote. And I think the AfD and Thierry Breton was actually invited to talk about the situation in the upcoming elections in Germany.
Mhm.
And the question was asked to him whether or not he was concerned about the fact that AfD might not take the chancellorship, but at least be a force to be reckoned with in the Bundestag. And he essentially said, well, we will do what we need to do to preserve democracy.
Right.
So
this
they're
guy,
flipping the whole thing over. This is crazy,
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because basically the mask is off. That's what we're coming down to. And
Exactly.
the thing with Brenton is astonishing to me, because he was effectively bragging about this. This is former European Commissioner Thierry Brenton. And
he's the guy behind the DSA, by the way, the Digital Service Act, which is this kind of censorship. Yes,
I'm so not surprised.
He got into a major spat with Elon Musk, and Elon Musk essentially told him to go walk the dog, if you know what I mean.
Well, because
and
he is arguing here effectively. He says, "Look, the same thing that we did in Romania, we have the tools in order
we have to do it.
Yeah, we have the tools to be able to stop it in Germany."
Exactly.
And it's like, we
push
can
comes to
preserve
shove.
democracy by destroying democracy. Like, I mean, just outrageous. Like, and he's bragging. And I guess my thing is, imagine like your frame of mind where you feel so thoroughly comfortable to effectively say, we can overturn democracy in Germany if we need to in order to preserve democracy. You're like, what? Said it again? We can preserve democracy in Germany by overthrowing democracy? Yes, that's exactly what I just said. It's astonishing. And he's, like I say, he's bragging about it. We're not worried about the AfD winning because we can do the same thing to Germany that we did in Romania.
Well, you have to understand at the same time the sociological aspect to those people. I mean, they were recruited, trained, bred into that system. They were the one who back in the 1990s, even 80s, were advocating for the EU construction because EU was peace and nationalism was war. And now we're seeing, 35, 40 years later, the exact opposite. I mean, the EU advocates for war and more war, despite a complete military defeat there. I mean,
with the nationalistic governments being the ones who want to stop the wars, weirdly enough.
Want to stop the war and do trade, yes.
So, just bizarre. Utterly bizarre.
So they just can't, this would be tantamount for them to come out and basically said, I was wrong all my life. Essentially, I bet on the wrong horse, and I've got egg on my face. They'll never do that. They'll have to be kicked out. They won't do it. They won't have this kind of serendipity moment and come out clean and say, sorry guys, sorry for all the troubles. I made a huge mistake. They will never do it. They will never do it.
They think they're right. They think they're more moral. They think they're more ethical. They think they're just inherently more right. When I was in Europe and you would talk to some of the people who were voting for the liberal parties, they would say, well, those right wingers are just incompetent, they're stupid, they're racist. They say very similar things that they do in the United States for people who are Democrats. it is amazing to me. They don't see outside of that bubble. And because they don't see, and all of us are in a bubble to some degree, but they come across as somewhat cultish. And it's almost like they look at themselves in the morning with a sense of pride and respect that I have no idea where they get it from. And yet that's where they function. From your
chosen
point,
ones.
well, I mean, but certainly this is the losing in Ukraine is going to have an effect. And also you can see it in, like, for example, Schultz right now is like pushing on this notion of having a talk with Putin, between Trump and Putin. And you can see it in the way that the German political party, the AfD, has been very outspoken of, yes, we want to reactivate Nord Stream. And no, we don't want to be a part of this war. Or the liberal parties that are in France that are saying something similar, meaning there is a political aspect of Europe. I would even say there might even be the majority that is sick of the war, that wants it to stop, that don't want to take on this kind of pain and suffering that they're going to have to deal with, paying 5 times more for energy from the United States, or for that matter, paying all of this money for weapons. They want to get back to this idea of, we want to be our liberal democracies where we get our health care and we get our free education. That's what we want to do. So do you see losing in Ukraine? Do you see Trump coming in with this idea of pulling away from this kind of European project? Do you see Europe getting back to that, or no change in Europe? They're still going along with von der Leyen and the like, pushing for whatever particular European policy in alignment with the United States. What are your thoughts?
Well, the problem is we've just had European elections last June, so that
Yes.
train has left the station. To the extent we could expect some of those people at the top of the EU pyramid to come, to 180 degrees,
Not so much.
as opposed to 360, like Baerbock used to say. He's fond of saying, what is the institutional mechanism to replace those people? Unfortunately, they're here to stay for the next 6 years.
Wow.
So I think the calculus in their mind is they're going to try to work with their counterpart across the pond, which there are many left, believe me. If not, they are the overwhelming majority in the institutional levers and the lobbying groups and the globalist organizations. They're going to try to wait out the Trump mandate, and they're going to basically take a leaf from the old playbook and try to mar his term as much as possible, blame him for everything, and make sure that they don't really get their agenda pushed aside too much, so that when the time comes, and it will come, they will regroup. They will try to think something again through to prevent, eventually JD Vance, to the extent we are, being presented with JD Vance as a possible continuation of a nationalistic, home-centric approach to American policy.
Mm-hmm.
They will try to pull a fast one on him. But now, you really have a dichotomy in the US, and it's really fascinating to see, because Europe politically is irrelevant right now. Let's be honest.
It is.
The center of gravity of the Western world, politically speaking, more than ever before, is in Washington, D.C. And it's interesting because whereas in 2016, Trump somewhat acted in isolation, he was this kind of maverick, this kind of unidentified object. There we are now, 8 years later. He actually, there are billionaires with him, people from the power structure. We have some those kind of also confessions, or this kind of owning up to their mistakes, or blaming the Biden administration. I'm talking about Zuckerberg, for instance, who goes to Mar-a-Lago as he goes to Canosa and try to make amend and be on the winning team. So it's very interesting to see this realignment, and but make no mistake, it's all about trying to preserve American hegemony, at all cost, including European, because we can see that Europe is basically being thrown under the bus. But the idea again is, those people are thinking long term, decades, and this whole green ecology, a green economy, whatever they want to call it. This whole scam predicated on flawed numbers which called for creating a whole new tax condominium, because you want to get people, you were talking about, people want to get their health care, they want to get their centralized nanny state back, they want that. This is over. This was decided back in 1973. I would say even 1957,
Mm.
at the Club of Rome. The idea was, to preserve the semblance of a welfare system for as long as communism was an ideological alternative. To the extent communism collapsed in 1990,
Oh, I see.
there was no need left. Now, the real cynical, powers that be in the West, the money interest, didn't care much about the United States. It was all about, promoting free trade agreements that make no sense on the environment to begin with, which really goes to show you that the environment as a cause is a way for former Trotskyites to recycle themselves. We used to say green on the outside and red on the inside, like a watermelon. But it's a way for them to get a seat at the table of the new neoliberal order, keeping in mind that the idea in fine is to racket the middle class. You have to destroy the middle class. What JFK used to call the Great Society. You have to destroy that. You have to create this environment where man is a wolf for man, everyone against everyone, and we see it in the policies carried out in West Asia, because it's not about nation building. It's about destroying nations
Mhm.
and egging on factions depending on any given interest on any given day, favoring one faction over another and doing the exact opposite, the next day, but keeping them weak, chronically weak all the time, and at each other's throat, so as to preserve imperial power in the region. Well, this policy has come home now to roost. I mean, I think somebody wrote a trilogy back in the early 2000s. I forgot his name. It's called Sorrows of Empire. The Blowback was the first book,
Oh, Chalmers
and
Johnson.
Nemesis. Yes,
Chalmers
he
Johnson.
basically, yeah, Chalmers Johnson. That's right,
Those
and
books are
it's all
fantastic.
there.
Yeah.
I can't recommend people to, enough for people to go read those three books because it's really all there.
And by
But
the way,
now we're in the Nemesis.
you can listen to speeches also, by the way. I mean,
Yeah,
he
yeah,
a fantastic speaker and writer. And you're absolutely right. Like in Blowback, he was talking about how when 9/11 hit, we had no idea who did it because we had invaded and knocked over so many governments. We had pissed off so many people around the world. And yeah, when you get to Nemesis, I forget there was another one that he wrote. All of those books were fantastic. And yeah, it's coming home to roost in Europe in this kind of
in
strange,
America,
but
I
in
would
Europe
say, in
also.
America as well. Oh, yeah, of course, the
Well,
whole West.
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, but we have taken, it's almost like we've decided to loot Europe. Like, for example, the 5% for military spending. We don't even spend 5%. We spend $1 trillion a year on our military, and we don't even spend 5% of our budget on the military. And Trump is like, yeah, now we need you to go from 2% to 5% when they weren't even paying the 2% prior. Why do you think he's doing this? Is this a way to effectively pull the US from NATO and the responsibilities of NATO that the US primarily pays for?
Well, some would say that this is what it's all about, trying to get to understand that NATO is a losing proposition, but there are very deeply entrenched interests within NATO. NATO has been in place since 1949.
Mhm.
Careers have been built over, decades, and there's a whole culture that's been developed through NATO, and
Right.
NATO is a convenient tool to pry over, recalcitrant regions like East Asia,
Mhm.
which has where NATO already has entered into condominiums with other countries, local countries there. So NATO, there are a lot of people who are going to defend NATO tooth and nails. Make no mistake about it. It's just that Trump is thinking he has a 4-year term, right? We're not dealing with someone who has 25 years to put in place his vision. So he has to provide enough to everybody who's been somewhat coalescing around him, so that everybody leaves the room happy and satiated. And in the sense of the NATO rhetoric, he approaches the whole concept as a businessman would, saying, I'm not getting anything back as far as what I'm paying for. And so, to the extent we are the top net contributor to NATO, we believe, since we are providing security for Europe, which is a croak, because I mean, France has a nuclear weapon. They don't need American security.
Mhm.
But that's the message. We protect liberty, and Europe is our précaré, is our, Monroe Doctrine, somehow in the on the east, and it's our preserve. And so we need to expect our partners to pull their weight. But by doing so, it also ensures that with the added military budgets adopted in European countries, that money is used to buy, make no mistake about it, American equipment.
That's right. That's
So
right.
there's no European industry of defense. I mean, there was a nascent one, but it was still in the egg. When the Poles get, their financial dividends from Brussels, the part of it that's allocated to defense needs, they're buying the F-35. They're not buying the Eurofighter
Right.
or any other alternate Tornado plane, which is pretty good plane, Tornado. No, they buy this big bloated F-35, which we know is a flying coffin. It's too
But
too
they don't
many
know that.
electronics on board.
But see, that's the part about Europe that always gets me. Like, they don't get that. They don't get that when they're like when Donald Trump, it puts you in the mind of the mob, like Tony Soprano. It's like, hey, that's a nice restaurant you got there. It'd be a shame if anything happened to it. And then you come back next year and says, hey, by the way, the security fee has gone up to 10%. And it's like, what do you mean it's gone up to 10%? And what are you protecting me from anyway?
From yourself.
um, but they don't seem to come to that conclusion. They just, I mean, because what Trump is going to do, even if he doesn't get them to pay 5%, he may be doing this just to get them to pay their 2%. But he wants the money. And as you point out, the money is coming for all intents and
It's
purposes.
coming home. That's right.
Yeah. It's just so wild to me. And they do it. They go along with it every year.
It's a shakedown. The whole thing is a shakedown.
Yeah.
That's the dawn. Orange man.
Just astonishing. I got it before I let you go. We have about 2 minutes. Do you think the sanctions, to go back to the beginning, do you think the sanctions that Joe Biden is putting out, that they're going to have any kind of real effect on anything? I mean, oil and gas prices have gone up. I think we're at 81 a barrel or something to that effect. They haven't kicked off significantly yet. But do you think that that's going to have any kind of real world effect on Russia, or for that matter, the energy markets?
Well, it won't have any effect on Russia, to be sure, because Russia has, for quite some while now, found alternative trading routes and new customers. And China needs energy resources very hungrily. India as well. India accounts for, I think, 35% of sales, Russian sales of energy. And in fine, Europe, because Europe buys Russian oil from paying extra because you have to pay the middleman, which is India. So that's not going to upset the Russian economy. I think it's mostly a political ploy trying to tie the ends of the incoming Trump administration, keeping in mind that there's going to have to be elections held in Ukraine before there's any kind of I would say formal arrangement, to the extent they have a meeting of the minds on what they understand what Russia wants. And that this leads to some kind of a winding down of the hostilities and some kind of a rebooting of European architecture security.
Yeah.
Because this is what it's all about, really. But we're not talking about at least 6 months. So the idea is that for at least the next 6 months, going to summer, things are going to remain the same, and the sanctions are legal. I mean, I don't think. I guess the Trump administration could somehow show good faith by lifting some of the sanctions, but politically it would be difficult to go full out and unravel. I mean, keep in mind there's 30,000 sanctions against Russia. It's crazy. It's insane.
It's they've been doing sanctions going all the way back for like 20 years, if not longer, just sanction after sanction after sanction.
Yes.
I have to let you go, but one question: will Zelensky win the election if they have it in Ukraine? Meaning, will any kind of negotiation, the person who's handling those negotiations, will that be Zelensky? Does Zelensky have what it takes to win an election in Ukraine if it was held today?
No, right now it's polling at 11% in Ukraine.
Wow.
Yeah. No, right now, I mean, I'm going to make a bet here. I think we're going to be looking at the establishment candidate, which is Zaluzhny, former
Yeah.
Supreme Commander of Ukrainian forces, now serving as Ukrainian ambassador in the UK.
Yeah.
That's the imperial candidate. And we may see him facing Arestovich, who's now doing, funnily enough, he's doing the, I think he was on Joe Rogan
He's made a
recently.
180. He's
No, he was
become,
on Patrick Ben David. Patrick Ben
yeah.
David, yes. So
Yeah,
he's
done a
doing a lot of
180.
American podcasts, yes. And I think that's what so we'll have essentially a Biden candidate and a Trump candidate. This is basically what we'll have, because they need
Interesting.
someone to play ball, and Zelensky is too compromised by his never say die approach. I mean, even a couple of days ago, again, he says some crazy stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
things that make no sense. Oliver Stone underlined it also all the time. This guy is off his knockers. So they will retire him. They will retire him slowly but surely. He's made his loot, and
Yeah.
they will. Yes. But he's
Well,
politically, the guy is posterized.
well, we'll see what happens. I agree with you. Arestowitz has come back and he's been, very critical of the Zelensky government, to put it mildly. And as you point out, Zelensky, they kicked him out of Ukraine because Zelensky was concerned about him being a political rival. But they're saying elections, and they're saying elections are going to take place this year, first part of the year. So we'll see. You might be absolutely right. Arnaud Develay, he is an international lawyer specializing in international and criminal law, participated in the defense of former President Saddam Hussein along with U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. In the wake of the Caesar Act, he documented the illegal sanction regime imposed on Syria while living in Damascus. He is the author of Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of the American Political Consensus. Arnaud, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. Always a pleasure.
Always, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you.